Hey, what's up, guys? This is Adam from Rescue Michigan. It's time for our show. It is Thursday, September 2nd, and with us today is a special guest, Patrice Johnson from Pure Integrity for Michigan Elections, a new organization that we were actually hoping to interview anyway, and it's just so happens that after announcing our interview tonight, there's been some huge news in election integrity in Michigan. Number one, that Secure My Vote, the organization that's been working on the citizen-initiated election integrity law, just came out today. And so we've got that language to look at and talk about. We're going to go through it. Also, in addition to all that, there has been the huge news that the Secretary of State has put out some notices of proposed rulemaking, including the rules for absentee voter signature verification standards. So we'll take a look at what the Secretary of State is proposing. We're going to show you how to leave your comments and all of that good stuff. In the meantime, if you're in the chat, feel free to say hello just so we can confirm the chat is working. And by the way, you may have noticed in our latest email blast, we've been talking about migrating off of YouTube and onto Rumble. We're up now to, I think, just a little over 300 subscribers on YouTube, but no surprise, because we've been talking about election integrity and vaccines and all the kind of stuff that YouTube doesn't let you talk about, that we don't seem to be doing too well in the YouTube algorithm. So we do intend to migrate one of these days over to Rumble. The main hang up at this point is that Rumble does not yet, to my knowledge, support live chat. So sometimes we do videos where I just record them and upload them, and those can go to both places at once. And from now on, we're going to be just posting the Rumble videos, not the YouTube videos. But at least for now, we're still on YouTube for our live stream so that you guys can interact with us, which we think is important. So by all means, drop into the chat and say hello. And in the meantime, I want to introduce Patrice Johnson. Now, Patrice, tell us a little bit about yourself and whereabouts in Michigan you're from, and the history of you and your organization and getting involved in this crazy world of election integrity.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me on and for letting Pure Integrity for Michigan Elections air its views. We share a lot of views in common, Adam, so I appreciate being able to bounce ideas off you. Personally, I do not come from a political background. I have a master's degree in English literature, and I majored in philosophy in college and English. And
okay.
I worked in a corporate environment for the last 20 years, and then I have founded 4 technology companies. And with what happened with the political scenario, few of us friends were sitting around after the election, well, actually after heading into the inauguration, and said, well, we have to do something. We can't just let this stand. So we decided we would focus on election integrity. And so we analyze bills that are coming up through the legislature and work with our legislators to express where we see gaps. Our view is basically that I think up until now, our legislators have been acting as though everybody was operating in good faith. Instead of looking for, they weren't looking for holes and opportunities for abuse. Whereas this is what we need to be doing now. We need to be looking for where there are opportunities for abuse. And so that's what our organization does. We recently came out with a contract with Michigan because one of our concerns is how do we identify candidates that we can rely on and that will stick by the U.S. Constitution and the Michigan Constitution, as well as the platform that honors the Bill of Rights and independence of respect for the individual. So that's my background. It's all like drinking from Niagara Falls right now. We started in January, so I've been learning an awful lot since then. All of us have. We started with 6 people, and now we're up to 225 people, and we're based mainly in Ingham and Jackson counties. Our supporters are. I live in Stockbridge, Michigan. Thanks.
Great. Yeah. And, you know, I've noticed you guys are always on top of all of the bills in the elections committee. And there was a Senate elections committee hearing just this past week. So if you want to touch on those bills, although I also want to talk to you about the contract with Michigan, which Rescue Michigan was happy to sign on to. I thought it was a very well drafted document. And in fact, if you see my eyes jittering back and forth here, it's because I'm trying to pull it up so I can put it on the screen and show everybody what it says, which I think I've almost succeeded in doing. I got to save it and open it separately. Hold on, let me see if I can get it here. Yeah, let me. All right, let's do that first, then we'll go back to talking about what the latest bills are in the Senate Elections Committee. How do I zoom out? Let's
well, I can tell you a little bit while you're doing that. I can tell you how it came about. We analyzed the U.S. Constitution and the Michigan Constitution and both bills of rights that accompany those constitutions, and then we also analyzed various platforms of the parties, and as well. And then we put together a survey and sent it out to our members. And based on the survey, it was really coincidental, actually, that our members prioritized what the founding fathers had prioritized, which was free speech, the right to assemble, basically a lot of the right to keep and bear arms, state rights. So from there, we thought one of the concerns that our supporters have been saying is, well, how are we going to trust that we get the right people in office if we do support them? And so we said, well, why don't we look to what Newt Gingrich did way back in, was it under one of the Bushes?
It was Clinton years, I believe. I think it was 1994, I think.
That sounds about right, yeah. So we created a contract with Michigan based on the survey results and based on the constitutions and bills of rights. So basically, we have now 8 organizations, including Rescue Michigan Coalition. Thank you very much. And we have 3 signatories. Bob Scott, who's running for governor. Ralph Rebrand was the first to sign. He's running for governor. And Gina Johnson, who's running against Fred Upton. So we're hoping to ask every candidate to look this over. And I think you said in an email to me that anybody that can't sign this agreement isn't worth what'd you say? Worth salt to run, or shouldn't be
something like that. Yeah, I mean it's very straightforward. You've got, and we have it on the screen here now. So you're pledging your allegiance to the Constitution, pledging to serve honorably, and then you enumerate first these basic rights and principles: fair and accountable elections, free speech, the right to bear arms, states' rights, right to liberty and protection against invasion of privacy through the abuse of technology or bureaucratic agencies, right to due process and the rule of law, an impartial and blind judicial system, funded and functional police and sheriff systems, an educational system that nurtures student understanding of the noble principles of the Constitution, including the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to private property, the right to protect the nation against invasion, the need to preserve the nation's sovereignty, the need to protect and defend the nuclear family, the need to encourage, which, by the way, that one, it used to be, some families are nuclear and sometimes things go differently, but it's all the notion that a nuclear family is not something to be aspired to is bizarre to me, that it got even to that point. I mean, obviously not everyone can have a nuclear family, but it doesn't mean that's not something that's optimal, especially for children to have a mother and father in the home. Anyway, the need to encourage job creation through pro-growth tax and monetary policies, the right to secure borders. And then this goes on, but these are all basic foundational issues. It's hard to imagine a politician being unable to sign off to these basic cornerstones of American society here.
Well, you make a good point, but a lot of these cornerstones are under attack right now, and they're being undermined, and we need to all stand up to defend them, or we won't have these rights or privileges anymore. Some of them are rights and some are privileges, but all of them are fundamental to our culture and to our nation.
Yep. Well, outstanding. And I hope you get all of the candidates on record about this, because if any of them are not willing to sign this, that says a lot about them. Either a lack of loyalty to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the basic principles of our society, or perhaps a dysfunctional campaign that doesn't read its mail and doesn't know to respond to surveys, and therefore doesn't deserve the support anyway, because that happens sometimes. And I will say, having worked on campaigns, every now and then you do miss a candidate survey, but when you get a candidate survey that's the kind that you answer 100% in the affirmative, you really try not to miss those. It's usually the ones from, big labor and the Chamber of Commerce asking you to promise for this and that. Those were like, and usually the rule of thumb in campaigns is if you're not going to answer the survey 100% the way they want you to, don't even answer the survey, because they're going to just call attention to you not answering it correctly. But it's hard. I mean, these are not controversial things, or should not be in today's society. So if a politician fails to sign one of these, shame on them. So anyway.
We've invited any organization in the state to co-sponsor this. We're not, trying to take ownership of it. Anybody that wants to co-sponsor it can have their logo displayed on this document along with everybody else's equal partners, so that they can be talking to the candidates as they meet with them too.
Good, absolutely. And now tell us a little bit about the Senate hearing, because I glanced over the bills. They were familiar to me, and I thought, I don't know if I care strongly enough to come testify on one of them or the other, but I appreciate that you guys do show up to all of these committee meetings and always weigh in on these bills, so that they always do get that input. And you're in Stockbridge, so I'm about 80 miles from Lansing. You're probably about half that, so it's a little more convenient for you than maybe someone, way up north or coming from Harbor Springs or something. But it's good that you guys are making your voices heard. So what's the latest the Senate's been up to with election integrity? Because we've been getting this run around in the House saying they're too busy to take up our bills. They've got more important things to do. And some of the bills in those hearings were really not all that important, it seemed to me. But what's the latest the Senate's been up to this past week?
Well, that's a good point. Things seem to go dormant for a while. And there was a lot of energy about passing election integrity reform. And I think 2 bills made it through the Senate. A couple made it through the House, and none made it out of both. So it wasn't, there was a lot of more smoke than fire on this, I think. Yeah. So now I think they are trying to move forward. And interestingly, we were testifying just yesterday, I guess it was, on House Bill 4134. And Senator Johnson, Ruth Johnson, who heads up the Senate side of the Election Reform Committee, was mentioning that this bill, for example, is looking at allowing for precincts to be larger, up to 5,000 people. And as a group, we weren't really too influenced one way or the other on until we heard actually the Chris Swope of the Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks speak. And it was very interesting because he said, and I'm going to quote him, he said, there are other situations such as university towns that end up pushing that limit because every year, primarily a quarter of the kids move away, and so many of them don't get processed out. So I thought that was on 2 counts. It was interesting that you're losing every year, you're losing 25% of the registered voters. And the other portion of this bill is talking about creating a permanent absentee ballot file, so that once you become an absentee voter, you're always an absentee voter. Now, as it stands now, we already have students that may live in Pennsylvania and in Michigan that are voting twice. And we don't know, we don't track that. Our systems don't talk with each other. To create a permanent absentee ballot would be very interesting, because here we then checked, okay, so how many college students are there in Michigan? The answer to that is there are 537,083 in the year 2021. If you take that and multiply it by 4, if 25% drop off in 4 years, you have a qualified voter file with 537,000 opportunities for fraud, because there are people who are not really going to be voting. So somebody else is likely to vote on their behalf. Thank you very much. So as he was speaking, that dawned on us that for 2 reasons, you don't want to increase the size of the precincts. You don't want to increase the size of the precincts because you don't want to have long voter lines. Long voter lines would then just discourage people from voting in person and make them encouraged to vote more by mail. And by mail is where you have the voter fraud, mostly. not so much in person. So it's a lose-lose all the way around on that bill.
Yeah. Yep. And
So
it
that's
strikes me because there are such things as permanent absentee voters. There's no question when you look at a voter file, they say so and so is a permanent absentee. Typically, they're senior citizens. So I'm not sure what this is exactly changing here. Does it say?
well,
And I'm looking at the bill now.
mhm.
It's up on the screen. I don't think it says, because here's what I noticed: shall maintain a permanent absent voter application list. Application being different, not a permanent absentee voter, permanent application. But it does, I think. Wait. Let's see. Oh, here, this is interesting. They shall send to each elector on this list an application for an absent voter ballot for each election cycle, meaning all elections held in a calendar year. So what they're trying to do is make it so that you apply for an absentee ballot in spring of 2021 for your local bond millage, but then you're automatically receiving a ballot without having to turn an application in all the subsequent elections down to the end in the general election in the even number year. So it seems to me what they're really after here is encouraging people to not need to request an absentee voter ballot every time. So if something happens and they've moved or whatever else happens in life, they're getting an absentee ballot even if they don't request one. And I don't think that's a smart plan. I think they should have to request an absentee ballot every single time.
We're not living in the 1800s. People are very transitory in this world. For example, just in Michigan, we have been losing population, but it's at a churn rate of 40% are leaving to 40% are coming in compared to 60% are leaving. So you have a churn of just people coming in and out, and we don't share databases with a lot of states. So you could very well have an opportunity for phantom voters where, for example, before the election, when Jacqueline Benson sent out the absentee ballot applications, approximately somewhere between 400 and 800,000 of those bounced back to her. So she would have known, okay, these people are probably not going to vote. And anybody that could get a hold of those ballots that voted back, those were prime opportunities for somebody then to just vote on their behalf, especially with drop boxes and with loose voter ID laws. So it's a very hard thing to catch, but it's also just an opportunity that's ripe for abuse.
Yeah. And this is a bill from Ann Boland, chair of the elections committee. So we're all hopping mad about election integrity and the crimes that happened at the TCF Center and trying to prevent election fraud. Ann Boland is pushing legislation to make it so that it's easier for people to vote multiple times without multiple applications, easier for ballots to get out in the field, harder for people to vote if they're in a bigger, more congested precinct with more voters in it. It's wild. Any other bills we should be aware of that came up this week?
Yeah, there were four of them altogether. Another one was Senate Bill 280, and that was just a minor. We just recommended a minor change in proposing the law so that if it were passed into law, there would be a let's see, initiative petitions must be filed with the Secretary of State at least 200 days before the election, at which the proposed law, and would appear, and we said, it really the language should be strong. It should be, it shall appear. So that type of thing is that's just a one word change that would make that law stronger. So we just recommended amending it, but we would support that. Another one was a bill where they're requiring the Secretary of State to post a report on the Department of State for when clerks who are not getting trained. And we were encouraging the legislators to add clauses in there that would allow the parties to select workers to have input on training, and to have training be transparent, and then also to have the clerks be encouraged to hire from the lists that come from the parties. That way, you would have both Republicans and Democrats represented for example, in some of the counties where they tend not to be sometimes.
Yeah, that's one thing we've been emphatically pushing, is how important that is for all of the different election integrity elements. One thing I haven't seen any other state tackle, and maybe other states have different laws on the books currently, and every state's totally different, but one of the problems that we saw was that in Wayne County, they were deliberately, intentionally turning away people they knew were serious Republicans to be election workers. And that's not a legitimate basis for turning away election workers. The election itself is an adversarial process. You're supposed to have both parties represented because they're both supposed to check the other. That's the way that's supposed to work.
Right, checks and balances. That's what keeps people honest.
Yeah.
And actually, there's a flaw in the law. The law says that the clerks may select both equal from both sides, and they should change that one word to shall or must. Right. And it's just a one-word change that would then Janice Winfrey in Wayne County would say, "Oh, okay, so this time I have to," as opposed to it's not my option anymore. Yeah, you know.
And even then in Michigan, we have the problem that because we don't have partisan voter registration. I think most states do, but it's a little more than half the states. You register as a Democrat or a Republican. In some states, you can register as an independent. And depending on the state, some states an independent can't vote in the party primaries, and in some states an independent can vote in any party's primaries. But at least you have a record of who the voter actually is. Whereas when you apply to be a poll worker, or say a redistricting commission member, all you have to go by is what party you say you're affiliated with. And there's no real way to verify that, with some exceptions. I'm a Republican precinct delegate, so they can prove I'm a Republican, but the huge majority of people don't have any kind of ability to be identified as not being who they say they are. And so there's no way for, one of the things that we saw in Detroit, I was a poll worker in Detroit, the huge majority of the electronic poll book inspectors, the people running the laptops, were these high school kids. They even told us in training, we've got all these high school students being these electronic poll book inspectors. And you wonder, where did all these high school students come from, and who recruited them, and what party did they put themselves down as when they were filling out their job application? And it's not hard to imagine what happened.
Their mom tell them to do, exactly. Or their dad, who was pulling their chains, and they were too naive to know. I mean, they would do it probably how they were instructed, and so I think everything would be dependent on their being instructed fairly and honestly.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that we even allow minors to be poll workers, because as a poll worker, you're assuming serious legal responsibilities. And, a child can't get a tattoo because they are not of age to even make medical decisions about themselves. But we're trusting them with the integrity of elections. It's just totally bizarre. But anyway.
Well, the same thing happens with voting registration. When 16-year-olds register to get their licenses, they're automatically registered to vote when they turn 18. And you can question whether that's something that voter is an educated voter or even is a willing voter. They have to, the way the Secretary of State currently does it now is when you apply for your driver's license, you have to check a box saying you do not want to register to vote.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're automatically registered to vote.
Yeah.
And then you get questions in terms of, is this person a citizen? And I'm not sure how carefully they check to see if a person is a citizen. And in college campuses, a lot of times, for example, in this last election, right before the election, there were like 253,000 students that registered to vote at U of M in campuses in Michigan. And whether they were registered in other states, we don't know. We don't check.
Yep. Well, we're 23 minutes into the program, and we should really get to the big news, because this just came out today. We were looking for this earlier and we're having difficulty finding it because there's this new website here, securemyvote.org, and this is the website for the citizen-initiated law for election integrity. It's at securemyvote.org, and you can sign up here sign the petition to secure Michigan elections. Now, that's not going to actually be a petition signature because these are the kind of petitions you can only sign in person. This is really this is a contact form. But what they're going to be doing is a citizen initiated law, which is the same thing that Unlock Michigan did last year, where you collect a sufficient number of signatures. It's, I think, 340,000 valid signatures, meaning you really got to collect 500,000. And then the legislature can pass that law, and it would not be subject to the governor's veto. Or if the legislature does not pass the law, it goes to the ballot on the next November election. But obviously the hope is that the legislature passes the law and then it goes into effect in time for the next election. But what I found interesting is at the bottom of the screen here, you see there's a petition language. If you click on that, let's see what we get. Hold on, the page is still loading. We get only this 100-word summary, which we will read right now. But it's just a summary. It's not the details. So we're going to go through the details with you because thanks to you, Patrice, you got it to us. I'm not sure how you found it, but we got it somehow. So here's the 100-word summary. This is what will appear on the petition pages that people are signing. An initiation of legislation to protect the right to vote by requiring individuals to provide photo identification before casting a ballot, to increase participation by providing free photo identification to any person wanting to cast a ballot who lacks photo identification, and by increasing public confidence in the conduct and administration of Michigan's elections, and to protect the integrity of Michigan elections by prohibiting special interests from funding or directing the conduct of Michigan elections by amending sections yada 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 and adding sections yada yada yada. So that's the summary. So let's just go through this bit by bit. First, it says we're going to require individuals to provide photo identification before casting a ballot. Right now, if you show up to vote in person, you have to show photo ID, or you can sign an affidavit saying you swear you're who you say you are. Then it says to increase participation by providing photo identification to any person wanting to cast a ballot who lacks photo identification. I actually disagree with the premise of this clause here because I was a poll worker in Detroit in the November 2020 election. I was a ballot box inspector, which meant that I would receive the ballots in the secrecy sleeves, although half the time the voters took them right out anyway. And you put the ballot into the ballot box, and then you took the application to vote and you put it on the spindle. So by the end of the night, I had a stack of like 200 of these applications to vote. And the way it would work is on one side, you have the poll worker signing off that they've looked at your ID. And if they don't have ID, on the back, there's an affidavit they sign. So I flipped through the whole book. I looked at every ballot. There was not one voter in that Detroit precinct that night that voted without identification. Everybody has voter ID. So I don't think this is going to increase participation. What it's doing is providing free photo identification, which, I mean, I guess it's not the biggest deal in the world. I think ballot or IDs cost money. I don't think that was it $12 to get a photo ID is that big of a deal, but there it is. So there's that. Increasing public confidence in the conduct. That's just hot gas. That's not tied to any particular policy other than.
Well, could I just pipe in here a little bit?
Yes, please.
Because in looking at the initiation of legislation, I think they removed the photo ID requirement. I'm not seeing that in the print of the document we received.
Well, we will look through that language very carefully. I think, well, it has something in there, but yeah, we'll take a close look at that in just a moment here. But anyway, moving on. The only other thing it says is protect the integrity of Michigan elections by prohibiting special interests from funding or directing the conduct of Michigan elections. So that's in reference to the reports from particularly the Center for Technology and Civic Life, which is known to be Mark Zuckerberg's organization. The Zuckerbucks, as they're called. This is the guy who runs Facebook and is one of the leading destroyers of free speech and controllers of propaganda in America, influencing our ballot system to the tune of, I think it was $11 million in Michigan. CTCO spent in grants for such things as providing ballot equipment for municipalities, providing voter registration drives, but targeting in particular only liberal districts. Huh?
Just for certain municipalities.
Right, right.
Yes.
Yep. Anyhow, so the gist of it is, from at least from the 100-word summary, which I think we can take to the bank, we're talking about photo IDs and we're talking about prohibiting the so-called Zuckerbucks. But let's look at the actual language of the citizen initiated law, because this is going to be what this is what it will actually do. So here we have the proposal. Now, like a bill in the legislature, what they do is they restate the entirety of the existing section of law, and then they either cross off what they're removing, like you see here, they're crossing something off, and then above that, you see this in all caps. That's what they're adding in. So this is actually a very lengthy bill. It's 5 pages. This is just page 1. So it's going to be printed. They have to print this on the petition pages. So it's very small font, single spaced, hard to read. But at the same time, most of the language is actually just restating what the existing law is. So here is the initiation of legislation. That's what we just read. And then they have this. So first, section 495, the registration application must contain all of the following. And it's adding in this section, their subsection. One of the things the application to register to vote contains is going to include the last 4 digits of the elector's social security number. Now,
That's not photo ID.
right. That's right. That's
ID.
right.
Sorry.
And
So,
the interesting thing here too is that the last 4 of your social security number is not as confidential as the full, what is it, 9 digits? 10? 9. Yeah. 9 digits.
Yeah.
The last 4, I wonder how many nursing home employees might be able to access their patients' last 4 digits. Wonder why that would come to mind. But we'll address that in a moment here. Okay, so here's what we're doing. We're crossing off. Now we're getting to the more of the meat of it here. So section 523, we're crossing this all off. Except as otherwise provided in subsection 2, at each election, before being given a ballot, each registered voter must identify him or herself by presenting identification for election purposes and by executing an application on a form prescribed by the Secretary of State in the presence of an election official. That includes, and then there's listing these things. Now it's going to say, before providing a ballot to any person offering to vote, the clerk of the city or township and those election officials acting under their direction shall ask the person for his or her full name and current residence address. The person offering to vote shall, in the presence of the election official, sign an application, full book or form prescribed by the Secretary of State that affirms all of the following. And then they're changing names. You'll often see this in legislation. This is what we call legislative housekeeping. So they cross off elector and write in individual. Those don't really do anything. They're more stylistic than anything else. So the affirmative statement by the elector that's included in the signature statement identifying changes to say a statement affirming that this information is correct and that the individual is a citizen of the United States and is currently a resident of Michigan residing at the address stated in the qualified voter file. I don't think that's changing very much. Again, you see elector changed to individual. And now here's where it gets interesting. Crossing off. If the elector does not have identification for election purposes as required, the individual shall sign an affidavit to that effect before an election inspector and be allowed to vote as otherwise provided. However, an elector being allowed to vote for without identification is subject to the challenge provided in section 727. Now, a voter being subject to challenge, first of all, I don't think that actually means they're automatically challenged. But even if they are, a challenged ballot is still actually tabulated on election day. What they had us do in Detroit on election day was they said if a ballot's challenged, what you do is you write the ballot application number, the ballot number, onto the ballot itself, and you cover it up with this sticky white Post-it tape so that the machine doesn't know that the ballot number is actually copied down there. So that if maybe at a later date through adjudication, they got to fish the ballot out of the ballot box, they could pull it out and discount it. Although in practice, I don't think that has ever happened.
probably not.
But what they're saying we're going to be doing instead is this. The election officials shall ask any individual seeking to cast a ballot to present one of the following forms of identification. A driver's license, or an enhanced driver's license, or a state ID card. So those are all the same thing. That's your state ID.
Right.
Or a current operator or chauffeur's license issued by another state, or a state government issued photo ID, or a passport, or a military photo ID, or a tribunal photo ID. So this is the standard types of IDs that they accept. A current student photo ID card issued by a high school in the state. Boy, these are getting easier to forge now. An institution of higher education in the state. And then, I actually zoomed out. If after confirmation that the requirements have been fully satisfied, it's found that someone's entitled to vote, they shall issue the ballot, yada, yada, yada. So wait, this says they will ask for these things. But now we have this. This is section 5, subsection 5. Any person who
if they ask for it and it's not provided, they'll give them the application anyway, and then they'll set it aside if they vote until they bring in. They have 6 days, I think it says.
Yeah, and this is actually really good. This is a much stronger protection. Yeah. But let's see if there's any exceptions. Yeah. Any person who does not present one of the forms of ID specified in subsection 3 shall be offered an ID-only provisional ballot. The ID-only provisional ballot shall be placed in provisional ballot envelopes, segregated from the other ballots in a separate ballot container that is, as that term is defined in section 168.14a, and returned to the local clerk. So a provisional ballot is a ballot that is not presumptively cast, not unless Correct. You follow up with the clerk's office and show them your ID or somehow establish that you are the person that you said you are. That's a big distinction.
Yes, that's a real good move. That's a real good move.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Within the 6 days after casting an ID-only provisional ballot, any person who casts an ID-only provisional ballot may present themselves to the clerk of the city or township, and upon presenting one of the forms of photo ID, their ID-only provisional ballot shall be processed and tabulated in accordance with section 3. A qualified elector who does not possess any of the forms of photo ID specified in subsection 3 may, within 6 days after casting an ID-only provisional ballot, present themselves to the clerk of the city or township with a copy of their birth certificate or social security card, utility bill, bank statement, the things you use to get a regular ID. Let's see, what else do we have here? The Voter Access Fund is created within the state treasury. The state treasurer may receive only state money for...
basically says if they qualify for need, that the state will provide it and pay for it. Call it paid for. Yeah. Yeah,
there's the appropriation here, $3 million from the general fund for the Voter Access Fund. So so this is where they're saying they'll pay for your ID if you need one.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's page 1. Page 2. Don't worry, guys. Not all of this is new language, so it's not going to take this long for all 5 pages. So section 759 adds all of this. The Secretary of State, the clerk of a county, city, or township, and all persons employed by the state or a political subdivision are prohibited from sending or providing access to an absent voter ballot application for an election to an elector unless that voter has first requested an absent voter ballot application. The Secretary of State, the clerk of a county, city, or township, and all persons employed by the state for any political subdivision of the state are prohibited from sending or providing an absent voter ballot for an election to an elector unless the elector has first submitted an absent voter ballot application. Now, let's go back to what, Bill, we were just talking about that came up in the committee. To me, it sounds like this does not overrule that, because they're saying that your application for an absentee ballot is good for the whole election cycle. Let's read this again. The Secretary of State, the clerks, the etc.
Because you can't, they're not going to be mailing it out unless you request it, though. Unless you request it to be mailed.
Right, but they're not saying you can't request all of your ballots in one swoop at the beginning of a cycle.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's not overruled here. Anyhow, this goes on. They're crossing off or village. Villages are no longer political jurisdictions in Michigan, so that's not doing anything. That's just legislative housekeeping. Shall and must mean the same thing. I don't know why they made that stylistic change, but they did. In addition, an applicant for absent voter ballot must either provide on the application their driver's license number, official state ID card, or the last 4 digits of their social security number, or present an original or copy of one of the forms of ID for election purposes set forth in subsection 523 to the clerk of the city in which the elector is registered. So if you are voting in person, you have to show ID or else you get a provisional ballot. If you are voting absentee, you can show your ID, a copy of the ID, or just give them the ID number, or just give them the last four of your social security number.
Sounds like it. No photo ID required.
Not entirely. I'd be curious how many people would go for the last four of your social security number option there. Again, we won't know till it's too late. Now, my understanding about the backstory of all this is that behind the scenes, what was going on was that the chair of the House Elections Committee, Ann Boland, wanted this entire thing taken out completely. And she was demanding that they don't have an ID requirement at all. And to their credit, I think they stuck to their guns on this and said you have to show ID, but maybe as part of a compromise, they would allow either to write down the ID number, which I think that might be okay. I mean, to me, writing down a copy of your driver's license number is not much more burdensome than being able to just take a photocopy of the ID. I understand people don't have scanners like they used to have. Printers aren't as common as they used to be because everyone's doing things over the phones these days. But it's important to note too that
81% of voters think that there should be voter ID.
Right.
So there's huge support for that. Why we would weaken that, I don't know, because I think people want to know that the people who say they are who they are the people who voted.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to copy numbers, driver's license numbers, social security numbers. Those are available. So photo IDs are really, I think, very important. And they need to tie the clerks then. I'm sure most do, but they need to be sure to check those numbers to be sure they tie to a real citizen of the United States.
Yeah. And I would make the point that the last four of your social security number is much less private than those other 5 digits are, because people put them down all the time. And they're just fundamentally not as secure as the rest of that number.
That's right.
And the other issue is too, we saw earlier in this language, they're saying they're now going to have on the application, on the registration, they're collecting your last four of your social security number. But what that doesn't apply to, I mean, that data is going to take years to come in if they don't already have it. So maybe they already have that. I don't know. It's interesting. The social security system was not intended to be your national ID card number, but apparently it's so common now that the state's going to just be able to have that last four for everybody. Are they going to check this against what happens if they don't have a record of your last four? So,
and actually, it's not uncommon in college campuses that they don't allow social security numbers to become. Social security numbers used to be student ID numbers. Yeah. They don't do that anymore because they're becoming they're just not as secure anymore. Yeah.
Anyhow, moving on. What we now have, I think, is really just comporting with what we just read already. What they now have is the application for the absent voter application must be in substantially the following form. And they're really just restating what we just read. This is just the form that goes to voters. So now you have to provide, well, here we go. You must choose one of the voter identification options below. If you don't satisfy one of them, you will be issued a provisional ballot. And you can provide your license or personal ID number, the last four of your social security number, there is again, or present ID to the clerk, him or herself. And that's all there. Oh, wait, there's some more here, but this is the same thing again, right? In addition, you must either provide your license, state ID numbers, yada, yada. So that's more of the same. So that's page 2. Page 3. And again, in addition, an applicant for absent voter ballot must provide the application their license number, state ID number, or the last four of the social security number. It's the subsection. If an applicant does not provide their driver license number, official state ID number, then they get a provisional ballot. So same as we saw before. Subject to subsection 4, and that just references the paragraph above. And that's it for that whole page. That page went fast. Now we've got page 4. So a little too big. Here we go. Try to get this into frame.
It's a repetition of the ID requirements.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
Any registered elector may apply for an absent voter ballots. It's not grammatical, but I guess it's not the end of the world. Prior to 4 p.m. on election day. Crossing off if he shall have, if they become. You know, this is Marxist pronouns going into legislation, courtesy of the House Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader. They is a singular word, not a plural. Don't do that. Anyway, it's a minor gripe, but it infuriates me.
I'm with you on that. I was an English teacher for 7 years.
Yeah, I mean,
I like my subject and my verbs to agree.
Yeah, and to me, it's just so shockingly offensive. I'd like to be referred to as they. Who do you think you are? You know? Good Lord.
Who you see? Who's standing beside me?
Yeah. Anyway. Fabulous Fergie says, hello, we see you guys in chat. By all means, feel free to leave questions in chat. We'll take them on as we see them and find time. So please, by all means, let us know your questions. We're happy to answer them. Anyways, where were we? An emergency application, voter application must be provided, blah, blah, blah. And an applicant for emergency absent voter ballot must provide either in the application their driver's license. Okay, so it's more of the same. Subject to this subsection upon receipt by the clerk of a ballot application. He to they. He deliver them the ballot at his or her. Oh, here we can do it. His or her. That'll get crossed off in the next revision. To a person, individual named by the. There's actually a legal reason I think why, because I think it came from Citizens United, the notion that corporations are people, that they say individual rather than a person. So I'll let that one go.
Sure.
But anyway, if an applicant does not provide either their driver's license number, official state ID number, the last four of the social security number, or present ID for the election purposes, the provisional ballot. Okay, yes, same thing again. Each city or township clerk shall have access to the most current Department of State data containing all of the following for their clerk to satisfy the last four, the license number, the ID number, and then subject to this subsection. And so they're adding in here, if that application is not, it's all the same again, provisional ballot, if not ID or SOCH. Here again.
I think section 946 is where you get into the Zuckerberg bucks on page 5.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to jump that far ahead or not, but
I think we're on page 5 now, because this is in all caps at the bottom of this page, but I think that's because it's a warning that's actually in all caps.
okay.
That's not new. So we're on the last page, guys. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Okay, so crossing off this paragraph that's crossed off here, where I'm kind of I can't highlight this document because it's a picture. Actually, I guess I could. Well, it'd be tricky. They're crossing off the bit about the affidavit because there's no longer going to be affidavits. It's going to be that you either provide ID or you get a provisional ballot.
Right.
So yeah, there's more of that at the end. Okay, next we've got section 761B. In addition to subsection 1 and the requirements of the Constitution, during the 5 weekdays before general, primary, or special, the clerk shall receive absent voter ballots either at least between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. or through an absent ballot drop box as provided under this act. Why they're putting this here, I don't know. During the 5 weekdays before a general or special election, every city or township clerk shall receive absent voter ballots either in his or her office. Oh, so they're saying they have to be open from 9 to 5 every day. That's what they're saying. That's what they're saying there. That's
Or
not
through an absent voter drop box as provided under this act. So,
well, the drop boxes are already in statute.
See how it's provided.
Yeah, they're not adding in absent voter drop boxes as a new thing here. I think
I'm sorry.
the operative language here is that they have to be open from 9 to 5 for the 5 days before with 5 weekdays before the election. Like, I'm in a very small township where our clerk's only open till noon, like 3 days a week. And they're saying in the 5 weekdays before the election, they have to be open from 9 to 5 every day. And I think they just threw an absent voter drop box because they're collecting from those anyway. I don't think that's changing anything. Section 764B, all absent voter ballots must be delivered to the city or township clerk, or an absent voter drop box is provided under this act by 8 p.m. on the day of the election. Any absent voters' ballots delivered after that time shall not be counted. Hey, I kind of like that one. The ballots are not in hand by 8 p.m. Tough. So, yeah. Get your ballots in on time, folks. All right, section 813. Within 6 days after the election, each provisional ballot placed in an envelope shall determine whether... Oh, this is just going to be comporting with all the language on provisional ballots up above. An individual voting the provisional ballot is determined to be eligible to vote a ballot. The city shall, within 7 days after the election, send the provisional ballot to the County Board of Canvassers to be tabulated. A provisional ballot must only be tabulated if the Board of County Canvassers verified to the elector, the city or township clerk, their residence, address, and all the yada, yada, yada. And before the ballot is tabulated by the Board of County Canvassers, election officials shall process the ballot as a challenged ballot. The Board of County Canvassers must maintain the secrecy of the ballot when tabulating provisional ballots under this subsection. Secretary of State shall promulgate rules pursuant to the Administrative Procedures Act. Yeah, yada, yada, yada.
So now is where you get to the public monies appropriated by the Michigan legislature or by the county, city, township, or village.
Well, we got 2 more things crossed out here. Let's just double check. We want to be thorough. Within 7 days after an election, but sooner if practicable, the city or township clerk shall transmit the results of provisional ballots tabulated after the election to the Board of County Canvassers. I guess this part above is replacing that, so that's no big deal. And yeah, same thing here. Okay. All right. So then finally, section 946. Michigan elections shall be funded with public monies appropriated by the Michigan legislature or by the county, city, township, or village conducting the election. This state, a department, agency, commission, or board of... Wait, did I skip a line? Or a board of this state or a county, city, township, or village shall not accept or use any private funds, in-kind contributions, or other consideration from any individual or entity, either directly or indirectly, to conduct or administer an election. This prohibition applies to any election-related activities such as voter registration, voter eligibility review, mailing of election materials, sharing of voter information, creation or dissemination of advertisements about an election, or recruiting and hiring precinct election inspectors, as well as election-related equipment such as tabulators, communication devices, signs, tents, voting facilities or locations, or absent voter ballot drop boxes. Michigan elections shall be conducted in accordance with the United States Constitution, Michigan Constitution, Michigan law. Well, that's a nothing. Individuals other than Secretary of State or election officials with a county, city, or township acting pursuant to the law and Constitution shall not direct the conduct or administration of Michigan elections.
So that's pushing back against the possible passing of HR 4.
Oh, okay. You mean HR 1, or is there another one?
Yeah, they couldn't get the they couldn't override, get the 60 votes to do the HR 1,
okay.
So that it resurrected as HR 4, and the House has passed it, and they're working to get it through the Senate through a weird thing where it's called deeming it something, where they pretend they're voting for one thing and it's counted as voting for another. And that way the moderate Democrats won't feel their name is being attached to voting for something so onerous as taking away states' rights to have their elections and federalizing the elections like you might have in Iran.
Yeah, I don't think their Senate's going to fall for that maneuver, but okay, we'll see. But
I think it would be contested. It would certainly be contested in the courts. But then again, you're relying on the courts to
the courts are going to assume senators all know procedure, and they do, or at least their staff does, and they know these maneuvers. So.
They've used that maneuver one time before, way back in, I don't know, 1863 or something. I don't
Well,
remember when.
it's a different
But
time now.
it's a questionable maneuver, and that's what they're planning to do. I understand. I mean, maybe they won't, but that's currently what
I'm sure they'll
talking.
try, but I don't think they're going to succeed for the same reason HR 1 wasn't going to succeed. The reason why it didn't pass is because they didn't have the votes.
Right.
But anyway, that's pretty much it. The last section just says it's severable, which I think is actually automatically true. I don't know if they had to include that there, but I believe all Michigan legislation is automatically severable. So that is the text of the legislation, guys. Just
Petition.
well, the petition, yes, citizen-initiated law. So legislation, we hope, will become a law, but then again, there are certainly some shortcomings there. You're a little bit out of frame there. Thank you, Patrice.
Sorry, I'm moving.
Yeah, I got to try to stay centered too. So a couple of thoughts on there. Number one, not crazy about the Social Security number alternative, but I think maybe more research is needed to know to what extent that's going to be a serious problem. To me, I think the biggest reason why they're pushing voter ID is not because people are voting without ID, because people aren't voting without ID. I think the major reason is because ballots can be intercepted by sources that shouldn't have them. Nursing homes in particular are rife with fraud, where nurses will fill out on and help their people vote. Things like that. Like, my grandfather is 93, but he's fully cognizant. He has his ID. His vision's not good, but he has binoculars to watch TV. He knows how to vote. He doesn't need assistance voting. The people who need assistance voting are people who are barely holding on. And these are folks who are, first of all, probably not going to know how to vote in the first place, but second of all, essentially giving their vote to their caregivers. And that's
right. Sometimes in these nursing homes, there are paid operatives that go into the nursing home and get permission to help the residents vote.
Oh yeah.
And then, yeah, it's not necessarily the nurses. It's a paid operative that comes into the building, scoops up everybody's name and ballot and votes for them.
Yeah, I'll actually put this up on screen. This was a great article that came out just about a year ago. Just a little over a year ago, where he explains how he would fix mail-in ballots. And these are exactly the things he was talking about. The whistleblower, a top Democrat operative, of course, says voter fraud is no myth. He knows because he's been doing it for decades. Races from the weeds of municipal to federal elections. So small and large, he would be involved in rigging elections. An election can be swayed by any number of votes. The whistleblower, whose identity, rap sheet, and long history of working as consultant to various campaigns was confirmed by the Post, as he's not only changed ballots himself, but led teams of fraudsters and mentored at least 20 operatives in the New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania area, where, of course, is where a lot of these things like to happen. He says, there's no race in New Jersey from city council to the U.S. Senate where we haven't worked on. I worked on a fire commissioner's race. The smaller the race, the easier it is. And he talks about these things: phony ballots, talking about operatives fan out, going house to house, convincing voters to let them mail completed ballots on their behalf as a public service. They would then steam open the envelopes and replace them with fraudulent ballots. Inside jobs. And here they talk about the nursing homes right here. Assisted living facilities and helping the elderly fill out their absentee ballots was a gold mine of votes, the insider said. There are nursing homes where the nurse is actually a paid operative, and they go room by room by room to these old people who still want to feel like they're relevant, says the whistleblower. He's a Democrat, so that's the contempt he does have for these people. They literally fill it out for him. The insider put into former Jersey City Mayor Gerald McCann, who was sued after a razor-thin victory for a local school board seat for allegedly tricking incompetent and ill residents of nursing homes into casting ballots for him. Voter impersonation, I mean, these are well-documented things that they do. And so voter ID is, of course, one important element of improving the elections. But I think the thing that people really want to know about is why there aren't more things in this proposal that we've been talking about for a long time. Obviously, just from reading this article, one thing that came up was ballot integrity. And that's why we got, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Rep. Paquette. He was one of their 7 bill sponsors on our bill, requiring ballots actually have security features so they can't just be counterfeit. And actually, I have, I mean, don't quote this as anything other than a rumor, but I know a guy who knows a company that has made an offer to produce ballots with all the security features that currency has, like 13 different highly sophisticated security features. And he says it would cost you at the bulk rate that you would be paying as a state about 25 cents per ballot. Now, that's not a trivial cost, but for the cost of election integrity, it's not that bad a thing compared to some of the other stuff the government spends money on.
That's right.
And
I think at this point, the most important thing for our nation to preserve our republic is confidence in our elections. And that it doesn't matter if the cost is 25 cents or $1 a ballot. That would be money well spent if it helped create an actual integrity to the voting process.
Yeah. Now, there's other things too. Of course, and we were just on a call with people that were saying how important an audit is for the past election. But then also, one of the big concerns people have, whether, right or wrong, is that these voting tabulators connecting to the internet is a totally unnecessary security hazard that could be done away with. We have a bill that just says they can't connect to the internet, and there's alternatives to reporting stuff just by, like, the only reason they say tabulators have to connect to the internet is to report the results at the end of the night. And there are plenty of alternative easy ways to do that don't involve putting modems into the tabulators.
That's right. And the problem with that is if they're not allowed to inspect the machines, and they're not allowed, I mean, they can make all the laws in the world that they want to, but if those machines have modems or chips in them, they are going to be subject to intrusion. So it's near impossible to make them secure unless they're just dumb machines that don't do any calculating, don't have microchips in them.
Well, I mean, they need microchips just to process the ballots, but still, they don't need to electronically report the results. And just having that option, I mean, if nothing else, it certainly gives people a reason to question the results of the election. And to me, public confidence in elections is a goal in and of itself. But there are other things. We've talked about these things on this channel many times before. Controlling and making, we talked about it just earlier tonight about who gets to work at the polls, the rights of poll challengers, video recordings of proceedings. You can document evidence. All of these things are not in this proposal.
Chain of custody isn't in there either.
Chain of custody, yeah. There's, and any number of these things people are going to be concerned about. Now, I would say to that, there's a couple of points we have to make here so that people understand. The first thing is that any citizen initiated law, any ballot proposal process, whether it's a citizen initiated law or a constitutional amendment, these are always subject to legal challenges by the opposing side. And the challenge is that the claim the other side will make, no matter what we do, is people don't know what they've signed. And you have no way of knowing how a court's going to rule on that, other than the more stuff you put into the proposal, the more likely it is they're going to say this was too complicated. Just to give you guys some sense, I mean, it's actually, I printed this, I don't have legal size paper, but this will be printed on legal size paper, 8.5 by 14. And we just read over, this is 5 pages of legislation, because even the stuff that doesn't do anything has to be in there, because they have to actually recite every section of law that they're amending. Now, is this the most important thing in election integrity for the limitations you have here? I don't know the answer to that. I do know some of our bills were really, really short. Like the bill to prohibit the tabulators from connecting to the internet was a 1-sentence bill. It was a 1-pager. So could they have squeezed that in? Probably. But at the same time, I do think signature matching is going to be an important thing. And so I hesitate to say this isn't good enough when the fact is this is going to still have a positive impact. And that's not to say it shouldn't be doing more. But I'm worried the grassroots are going to come out and say this is garbage, this is trash. And I'm frustrated there weren't more things that we were pushing for in this, but I'm not going to denounce it. I think it's better than nothing. And I also want to point out, these citizen-initiated laws, as long as they're on good policy, are opportunity battles for everybody. You can grow a local organization collecting these petitions and talking to your neighbors and going door to door. And that's the very kind of activity we need to be doing like all through this.
And there's nothing to say that there can't be more petitions too.
Yeah.
It's all a matter of getting the language through the canvassers, getting the petitions finalized, getting the funding.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of hurdles to go through. So I agree with you. I think we run the risk of infighting and becoming ineffective. And
Yeah.
it may not be perfect, but it has characteristics to it that are very good and will be very helpful.
Yeah.
Could there be more? Yes, and hopefully
Yeah.
there will be more. But maybe those would be on separate petitions, and maybe those would get separate funding and different process.
And the reality is, these really do take money to run effectively. And if someone donates $1 million to Rescue Michigan, yeah, we'll run the petition that we wrote. But someone is donating money to this project that was willing to pony it up, and that was money that we didn't have. So, they have that right to decide what's their most important priorities, I think. That's just the way that goes. I mean, there's a group now talking about an election audit citizen-initiated law, and they've got all these hurdles. They've got to draft the language, they've got to raise the money, they've got to get the signatures, and then they've got to somehow get it through the legislature. Any one of those points of failure is very challenging, and the fact is that's not easy to do. So, I think
it's remarkable that Unlock Michigan accomplished so much, and it gave everybody a great deal of hope. Because as I think you mentioned on an earlier call, that most of these election petitions and initiatives fail for one reason or another. They don't make it through the cross the finish line. And Unlock Michigan proved that it can be done.
Yeah.
And they developed a model now that can work. And with that in mind, this is a good start. And I would recommend that we support it.
Yeah.
And then we keep working towards more.
Yeah.
And keep pushing our legislators.
Yeah, I mean, two things to that point. One is Unlock Michigan did not have the problem of complexity, because all it was doing was saying the Emergency Powers of Governor Act repealed. It was just one sentence. They didn't have to use 5 pages of text to put that all in there.
Good point.
But the other thing too is, though, I mean, they got funding, and I don't know where the money came from. There are public filings from Unlock Michigan, but they come from nonprofits, and you don't know where their donors come from. I would wager the money for that came from groups like Restaurant Association, Small Business Association, groups that were absolutely destroyed by the lockdown financially and had to fight back.
It was the associations for those groups.
Yeah. So, if there is room financially in the space for someone to do another project, great, have at it. Happy to encourage it. This is what we have. I think we've identified maybe some room for improvement, but let's be realistic about the Social Security number stuff. It's possible that this was a product of legislative negotiations. And if this doesn't get actually...
There was a lot of reference to photo ID in the paragraph that you read.
Yeah.
Before the actual document came out. So something happened between the creation of that paragraph and the summary and the actual document. So I think there's probably a lot of negotiations going on.
Yeah, and I'd sure love to know who they were that were. Well, I mean, I've heard from enough people to know. Ann Bolin was clearly one of the people that was doing everything possible to neuter this, and I'm grateful the party still stuck to their guns and required at least voter ID or Social Security number, because they were talking about taking out voter ID altogether. So, and then what would this be even left with? Not enough in my opinion. So anyway, that's the petition, guys. We'll hear more about that in the days to come. Hopefully they get these out in the field soon. And again, this is an opportunity to identify the people in your community that share your views on election integrity, people that you will need to run, candidates you have for state rep, candidates you have for local offices, building a local organization. That's the thing that we have to have all across this state is local networks of people. And there are people like you and me and Patrice, and of course you guys, the viewers who are watching this, are the 1% of the most passionate people out there. But there are people in your neighborhood who do care and just don't know who to connect to, and that's going to be you. And this petition, the Unlock Part 2 petition, these are vehicles to be able to grow your local organizations. At the end of the day, 2 years from now, these petitions they're not going to have the connections that you have personally with the people that are signing them in your own neighborhood. That's your organization that you can use to build from. So, is there anything, Patrice, you want to add before we move to the next topic? Because we've got another big thing, which is the Secretary of State announcing her signature verification standards.
Well, I would just like to mention, if anybody's interested in getting on our newsletter, to go to PureIntegrityMichiganElections.org. That's our email address, or our website address.
Here, let me see if I can pull it up. You said there's Pure Integrity. Is there
Michigan.
There's no 4?
No 4.
Okay,
no.
MichiganElections.org. All right, I'm going to share the screen so you guys can see. Here we go. So there it is. Thank you. PureIntegrityMichiganElections.org. So sign up. This is their website. Make sure you do that. Sign the petition. And they've got lots of stuff here. So be sure you check it out. They have a contact form too.
Yesterday's testimony is on there. Videos of it, as well as the written statement that we submitted.
Great. Excellent. All right.
We have Constitution, Michigan Constitution, Bill of Rights.
Good.
Lots of
great stuff. All right. So now, hold on. I'm going to put it back to just the two of us, just so I can clear my screen here and find where I've got the new request for rulemaking from the Secretary of State. I think this is it right here. This is from the Secretary of State. For those of you who don't know, earlier this year, just after it was too late to do anything and make any difference, the Michigan Court of Claims ruled that the procedure that Jocelyn Benson had for verifying the signatures on absentee ballots was unconstitutional, which incidentally means the majority of all ballots in Michigan were actually processed in an improper manner. And there is some major backstory to this, which is that the Secretary of State intentionally changed the rules because the way the rules were being used was suddenly very different in Michigan. Over the years, all across America, signature verification standards were used not just to verify that people casting absentee ballots were the people that they actually said they were. It was actually very strict because it was often being actually abused to kick candidates off of the ballot. Just as a famous example, there was a young senator from Illinois who was able to achieve, a state senator who was able to achieve that position in the Illinois State Senate by having all of his opponents disqualified by challenging all of their signatures. Who was that young buck? Barack Hussein Obama. Over the years across America, signature matches have been used to exclude third-party candidates from the ballot, with rigorous signature match standards and very high standards for collecting signatures. As recently as last year, a major presidential candidate was thrown off of the ballot in Illinois and I think Virginia and other states. His name was Kanye West, and he was kicked off the ballot in these states by having his signatures challenged. And of course, whenever you have a citizen proposal that involves collecting signatures, like, I don't know, how about recalling the governor of California? Suddenly, those signatures are very rigorously checked very carefully. Now, you can say these are all abuses and it shouldn't amount to that, but part of the problem is the double standard. There has to be a clear and consistent standard. In 2020, because of the COVID outbreak, all of a sudden, the demographics of absentee ballots changed because guess who used to be more likely to vote absentee? Not Democrats, Republicans. Republicans were the ones that had the attitude, vote early, vote often. Seniors tend to skew more Republican than young people who tend to vote Democrat. And so, therefore, the rigorous signature matching standards were just kind of enforced everywhere. But come 2020, suddenly Democrats are afraid to go out in public. Democrats don't want to vote in person. And it became clear from polls that Democrats would suddenly comprise the huge majority of absentee voters. So what did Jocelyn Benson do? We're going to presumptively assume every signature is valid.
Going to assume every signature is valid.
Yep.
That's right.
Now, unfortunately for the cowards in the judicial system, we never got to really find out to what extent that policy impacted the election, because the actual legal standard for challenging ballots, or challenging an election result, is that if the number of ballots in question whose authenticity can't be confirmed exceeds the margin of victory for a candidate, then the election results are invalid. But of course, the courts said, oh, we can't do that this time, because, you know, that would change the result of an election. So we're going to pretend that all this case law and jurisprudence doesn't exist anymore. But then after it was too late to matter, the Court of Claims went back and said, yeah, the signature verification standard was invalid. So, cut to the present day. This is the request for rulemaking from Jocelyn Benson, Bureau of Elections and Campaign Finance. Title of rule set: signature matching standards for absent voter ballot applications and absent voter ballot envelopes. Rule number R168.21 to 29. Filing date: pending. Effective date: pending. Request for rulemaking form. Here we go. Updated on July 19th. We can look at the PDF. Let's see what it says here. Oh, I got to pull this up on my computer. Here we go. The request for rulemaking. Estimated time frame: 6 months. Let's keep that in mind. Are the rules mandated by any applicable constitutional or statutory provision? If so, please explain. No. Okay. We don't need that, I guess. To create process for determining whether signatures in absent voter ballot applications or application returns agree sufficiently with the signature on file. Where's the filing date on this document? Nowhere. Okay, great. All right, well, let's go back and we will look at the draft rule language. Here we go. Open. And here is the draft rule language.
Okay, what should say here?
So, filed with the Secretary of State on blank. So here is the text of the rules that the Secretary of State is proposing. Definitions: election official means what election official should mean. Qualified voter file means what the qualified voter file should mean. Signature on file means what the signature on file should mean. Nothing special there. Okay, here we go. Sufficient agreement of voter signature. Initial presumption of validity. The very thing the Court of Claims said she couldn't do. But she's going to get around that by saying, well, initially we presume it's valid, but then there's exceptions. So, in determining for purposes of section 7612 of the Michigan election law, PA yada yada, whether a voter's absent voter application signature or absent voter ballot envelope agree sufficiently with the voter signature on file, signatures must be reviewed, beginning with the presumption that the voter's signature is his or her genuine valid signature. The signature shall be considered invalid only if it differs in multiple, significant, and obvious respects from the signature on file. Again, this is a 3-part test where all 3 parts must be satisfied for a signature to be disqualified. So they must be multiple differences, significant differences, and obvious differences. Slight dissimilarities should be resolved in favor of the voter. Exact matches are not required to determine that a signature sufficiently agrees with the signature on file. And then there's more. Redeeming qualities. If there are any redeeming qualities in the absent voter ballot application signature or the absent voter ballot envelope signature as compared to the signature on file, the signature must be treated as valid. So if one of your signatures looks like garbage, but the other one looks okay, the signature must be treated as valid. The Bureau of Elections shall provide examples of signatures with redeeming qualities and questionable signatures. Redeeming qualities include, but are not limited to, and again, any redeeming qualities. So never mind how wrong everything else could be. If there are any similar distinctive flourishes, if there are more matching features than non-matching features.
You know what this tells me? Tells me they're planning on the pandemic becoming very serious, so everybody will have to vote by mail-in and absentee. So they can forget chain of custody, they can forget signature verification, and they can, use all the fraud they want to use.
Yeah, they're expecting it's going to be the same, that it's going to be more Democrats voting absentee than Republicans.
If they can keep people scared enough and at home.
Yeah. Signature features do not match because it appears as if the voter's hand is trembling or shaking. Well, that's clearly a noble intention, because people, when they get very old, sometimes they've got those tremors. Of course, it's also easy to just make a tremor signature if you're a fraudster, and I guess that's all it is. I mean, that by itself is to make it possible for anyone committing fraud to just do that.
I think what the viewers need to know is that there are a few critical points in the verification of a ballot's validity, authenticity, and signature verification is one of the few remaining. It's one of the pillars left in the chain of custody that can identify where there's fraud.
One of the only things.
Throw a ballot out. So by weakening this, you basically make absentee ballots, mail-in voting, unstoppable in terms of fraud, and it's very vulnerable that way. So that's why it's so important. If you want to steal an election, you need to eliminate signature verification and photo ID and identifying that the voters are real people.
Yeah. All their redeeming qualities, and again, any one of these is all it takes for them to accept a signature. Only part of the signature matches the signature on file. For example, if only the first letters of the first and last name match. That's quite an example. Only 2 letters of your signature match. E, signature is partially printed, but partially matches the signature on file. Oh, yeah, because that's what happens when people are signing their signatures. They partially print their name. That happens all the time. F, signature is a recognized diminutive of the voter's full legal name. That's probably all right. Signature omits a middle name. Wait. Actually, no. The way this is constructed, and this is where the legalese kind of comes in. Any redeeming qualities, any one. So if the signature is diminished, that by itself is all it takes to say a signature is valid, that it omits part of the voter's full legal name. That's not a redeeming quality. That's a quality you might ignore, but it's not a redemptive quality at all. Same with this one. Signature admits a middle name, replaces a middle name with an initial, replaces a middle initial with a name. Or signature style is changed slightly from signature on file. That's all it takes. Signature style is changed slightly. Boom. Valid.
So is this now finished, or is this something that the legislature will need to approve?
No,
or what's the process on this? Do you know, Adam?
Yeah, we'll go through all that in a second. Let me just finish off reading what we got here, and then we'll go through the process. This is the very first stage. It's the request for rulemaking. It's their first draft of the rule.
Okay.
So explanations for differences in signatures. Election officials shall consider the following as possible explanations for discrepancies. Evidence of trembling or shaking could be health-related or the result of aging. And again, this does happen. However, it's also a convenient excuse for anyone committing fraud to just shake their hand as they're signing a fake signature. The voter may have used a diminutive or full of their legal name. The signature style, these are all things we just read. Signature has been written in haste. That's a catch-all. Oh, here's my new signature. I wrote it in haste. Here, let me try to bring closer to the camera. There, that's my new signature. I wrote it in haste. The surface of the location where the signature was made may have been rough, soft, uneven, or unstable. That's why we have a corrective process. Do it again. Next time, don't write it on the seat of your pants. Write it on a flat surface, like a normal person. In addition to the characteristics listed just now, the elections official may also consider factors applicable to a particular vote, such as the age of the voter, the age of the signature or signatures contained in the voter's record, the possibility that the voter is disabled, the voter's primary language, the quality of any digitized signature or signatures contained in the voter's record, or any other plausible reason given by the voter that satisfies the clerk. So yeah, I mean, this is anything goes. That's what this is. Anything goes. Timing of signature review and notification. If the absent voter ballot application or the absent voter envelope is received at least 6 calendar days prior to the election, the clerk must notify the voter of issues and following receipt of the. Okay, yeah, this is all fine. This is nothing unusual about the rest of this. That voter may cure missing or mismatched signature by providing a signature on the absent voter ballot application or a ballot envelope with the missing or mismatched signature by providing a signature or another form or method as prescribed by the election official. A voter may cure a missing or mismatched signature up to the close of the polls on election day. Okay, so this is the standard that we're looking at, which is basically no standard whatsoever. You've got presumption of validity, any number of exceptions, any number of redeeming qualities, and any one of those is all it takes. And then there's also all kinds of alternatives. So they're doing away with signature matching altogether is what they're doing.
Yeah,
That's what, there's no question what it is. So
process.
Actually, real quick before we go to the process, I want to point something else out. This is how a machine verifies a signature. This is from SoftPro, one of the leading signature verification methods used by banks all the time. You have undoubtedly used these before when you sign an electronic pad, and they notice things. They look at upstrokes, they look at crossings, they look at curves and loops, look at enclosed areas, look at the start and end of a stroke. They can tell from the signature the signals of time and pressure. They can look at the curves, the acceleration, the speed. They have all these tools that they use to prevent bank fraud, because that's what their job is. They're like, the signature is a security measure. It's important.
That's right.
Why don't they just adopt this standard? Why don't they just contract a company to implement this electronically? Because the signature verification is the only standard.
And you could do it with want. You wouldn't have to have your facility tied into the internet to do it. You could have a phone type of device that would do it probably.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to do the machines, the voting machines.
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways this could be done.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way they know is the way where their staff gets to determine based on their rules, which they've written to be as open to interpretation as humanly possible. So anyway, that's what they're doing. So the rulemaking process, let's talk about how that goes. In fact, we're going to look at the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. This is the agency in the legislature that is ultimately the final say in rulemaking, so far as that goes, and I'll explain that in a moment. Let me go back here. I'll come back to that page. Actually, I don't want to close that page out just yet. The rulemaking process. So the first step is the request for rulemaking that we just saw. The proposed draft rules, that's what we just read over. Regulatory impact statement, they got to do that. That doesn't take long to do. The next step is a public hearing. The agency must publish the notice of public hearing not less than 10 days and not more than 60 days before the date of the hearing. And that is scheduled. So here is the notice of public hearing. I will pull it up on the screen now so you guys can all see. The hearing will be held on Friday, October 1st at 9 a.m. at Cadillac Place, room L150, 3044 West Grand Boulevard, Detroit, Michigan, 48202. You may also submit your comments by mail or email until October 1st at 5 p.m. to the Michigan Bureau of Elections. Email elections@michigan.gov, P.O. Box 20126, Lansing, Michigan 48901. These submissions, your comments, your statements, email, mail, in-person hearing, these will all be public record. So take your time, get them right. That's when the hearing will be held, is on October 1st. After the hearing, they will have the final version of the proposed rules. The agency will ignore everything that we submit, but submit it anyway, please. And then the final rule package is submitted to JCAR, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. Now, let me explain what JCAR is. And I know this well because Rep. Riley was on JCAR in his first term, and I was his JCAR guy. JCAR is the only joint committee between the House and Senate, so they have senators and representatives on that committee. They meet only when the time comes to review and either approve or oppose rules. Here are their members. State Representative Luke Meerman, chair. Representative Steve Cara, one of the good guys. Meerman's probably pretty good too. Representative Matt Hall. Maybe. I don't want to say anything nice about him because I hear he's running for speaker. And I've got some things about him I could say that I'll say for some other day. But he has a reputation of being fairly good. There's 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats on each of these committees. So assume, or on the one committee rather, but three Republican senators, 2 Democrat senators, 3 Republican reps, 2 Democrat reps. Assume the worst of the Democrats on both sides. So you've got 4 bad votes to begin with. The senators are John Bumstead, alternate chair, Senator Ed McBroom, and Senator Lana Tice.
And they're considered Republicans?
Ed McBroom I no longer would. But I don't know. I mean, and of course I say that because of his authoring of the Senate Oversight Committee report on election integrity. And we've talked about that at length in many other shows, so we'll leave that there for now. But these are the 6 Republicans, all of whom are needed to vote to reject a rule. And by the way, here's the other problem. They don't actually get to reject a rule. JCAR got neutered some years ago. What JCAR can actually do, let me see if this is explained in the rulemaking process document. If the committee does not take action on the rules within 15 session days from the date of submission, the rules are filed and boom, they are the law of the land. So the committee has to actually say no. And they don't say here what JCAR can actually do to block a rule. All they can do is voice their opposition, and there's a process they have that triggers a 270-day stay on the rules. So now that the timing becomes really important. The hearing will be held on October 1st. They said in their request for rulemaking they expect the process to take 6 months. Doesn't mean it has to, and they'll probably try to rush it because 270 days is 9 months. So if the final rules get to the legislature before February 1st, they can only delay them up till 9 months after whenever that date is, but before the election. So that's where this is.
So the legislature really can't do anything. It's all this, just this JCAR committee, and you're not sure what they can do other than hearings and
JCAR can disapprove of a rule. It doesn't mean but they don't have the ability to block it. They what they basically do is re-refer it back for 270 days. And by the way, when I was on JCAR, they never did this. So this delay could get pushed back by 270 days. What I would suggest as a strategy is the legislature has to come up with their own signature standard. They have to have hearings on it. They have to have votes on it. Make the governor veto it. But I would say they got to deploy every tool in their arsenal. They got to say this is not authorized by any section of law. Notice that was in the request for rulemaking. Hold on, I clicked on the wrong link here. Let me go back. Request for rulemaking. Are the rules mandated by nothing? So there's statutory references. Secretary of State shall promulgate rules to conduct elections. That's all it says. But they need to do everything. They need to deploy every tool they can. Concurrent resolutions, legislation. Even if the governor vetoes it, keep pushing forward, because what the standard they've had is no standard. That's what the Secretary of State is asking for.
Mm-hmm.
Tricia asks, what kind of rule? Who made the rule? This is a draft rule that's been come up with by the Secretary of State on the signature verification standard for absentee ballots, and I think all ballots actually. So, and we did cover that earlier here, but this is the request for rulemaking. You can see the link at the top of the page. So there it is. Promulgation type, full process. I'll see about talking to some lawyers who know more about this than I do. There may be some that can get into more details about what the options are for lawmakers. Steve Carra, I hope, because he's a rep on JCAR, maybe he can do some research on his own time. Well, his staff's time. And he's got access to the Legislative Services Bureau and Research Division, so he can probably help us out with that. But this is important. This is really, really, really important. They're trying to codify into the administrative rules having essentially no signature matching standard for absentee ballots. And that's one of the only remaining safeguards we have on absentee ballots at this point.
It's really the only one left.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is that, guys. And with that, I think we've covered everything I wanted to cover. And we've gone for over 90 minutes now, Patrice. So thank you for being a trooper. I don't want to keep you any later. But if you get, for you guys in the chat, if you have questions you want answered, please let us know now. We can try to cover it. And if there's anything else to add, again, I hope I didn't close the window. I want to find, I'll just punch it into the browser again. Pure Integrity, MichiganElections.org. Check out Patrice's website and her organization. I mean, it's not just you, it's your whole organization, but thank you for being here with us tonight to cover all this stuff. But Pure Integrity, MichiganElections.org. Be sure to sign up for them too. And yeah, all right. Well, it's been a long night, guys, and my ears are sore from wearing this headset. So if there's anything else, Patrice, that we didn't cover,
no, I think we covered everything.
Well, great. And Tracy asked, will you be providing a link for this doc? Yes, Tracy, if you can't see at the top of my screen here, we are recording in HD. So the link is actually on stream right now, and the video that you're watching right now will be up at the same link on YouTube, and we're also going to cross-post it to Rumble. So you should be able to see it there. You might need a high-definition internet connection to be able to view it without having, you know, the pauses when you're trying to watch a video in full HD. But all the documents we've been showing in my browser, you can actually see the address of the document at the top of the screen there. Shannon asks, how can Secretary of State make signature verification null and void when the Court of Claims said how she did it previously was unconstitutional? The problem, Shannon, is that what the Court of Claims said was that the standard directive that she put out in the last election was unconstitutional because it did not go through the rulemaking process. So what she is now doing is going through the administrative rule process and trying to codify into the administrative law the exact same policies she essentially had all along. And that's where the legislature needs to step in every way possible to prevent this from happening, or at least delay it long enough so that it won't be able to be implemented before the November 2022 election, which is possible. And again, people don't know this. The legislature can hold up a rule for 9 months. That's extremely important. We have to lean hard on these lawmakers to do that, because it's going to take all 6 of the Republicans on that committee to do so. Otherwise, it's a 5-5, and they won't have the votes. So all 6 have to stand up and do that. So,
unless some of the Democrats do the right thing.
Fat chance. Jeff Irwin is rancid. Julie Brixey is terrible. I don't know too much about Kyra Bolden or Adam Hollier. I think I remember Adam Hollier is really bad. Maybe Kyra Bolden is okay. I don't know. I mean, I guess give it a shot. I'd make the point. Democrats have been supporting rigorous signature matches for years and years and years to keep the Green Party off the ballot, to keep Kanye West off the ballot, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, but you know, Democrats don't have principles and they don't have long-term thinking. It's all just however can we possibly cheat the next election? We're going to try to cheat. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I guess that's, you know, a blanket statement, but that's how elected Democrats almost always operate, and it's just the way it goes. So maybe
there's
one of them will be an exception.
Standard between the way they treat the signatures on a petition drive and the signatures on a ballot.
Yeah. Yep. Well, anyway.
Okay,
all right, guys. Well, hey,
much for having me on here.
Patrice, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a long and lengthy, but I would argue informative session we've had going through that citizen-initiated law, going through this administrative rule, and that's what we do at Rescue Michigan. We go through the documents, we give you guys the details. I know it's cumbersome, I know it's technical, but these details really do matter. So if you like this kind of content, be sure you like and share and subscribe wherever you're watching. Right now, we are live on YouTube, but we're going to be cross-posting to Rumble. And again, YouTube, we don't really have a future on YouTube, honestly. I mean, people are here because they got our email and they see it there, but we don't have any kind of organic growth on YouTube, because talking about elections and talking about vaccine choice and all this other stuff is a no-go for YouTube. They are vicious, nasty, evil censors, and the future is going to be on Rumble. And by the way, we're also going to be talking about our upcoming page on locals.com coming pretty soon too. So you'll check us out there too. So, all right. Thank you, Patrice. You've been a wonderful guest, and thank you all for all that you do for liberty. And as always, until next time, peace.